Hello Internet, I'm the Nostalgia Critic and I remembered so you don't No, I'm Grumpy Andrew, and if you can read you know that we're going to be looking at The Eye, Asia Extreme. I've tagged it as Asia Extreme in the description to differentiate it from the Jessica Alba remake, and simply because Asia Extreme is how there was a run of DVD releases called Asia Extreme here in the UK that Ring was a part of and Ju-on was a part of, and it's no surprise that this film falls squarely into the territory of Korean, Japanese, Chinese horror movies in the early to mid 2000s that got glossy American remakes. This became The Eye with Jessica Alba. Ring, or Ringu as some people call it, became The Ring with Naomi Watts. Ju-on became The Grudge with Sarah Michelle Gellar, and with varying degrees of quality. They were remade for a Western audience who people presume won't read subtitles. It's a dumb argument. I've never understood it. I'd say the only one that comes out smelling even somewhat of roses would be the Grudge movies. I might get into that a little later. I might not. We're going to be looking at The Eye, which is the most scary film since The Exorcist, says Uncut Magazine. It's not. What it is a film that starts off incredibly strongly and then sort of falls apart towards the end. So there's your Cliff Notes version. After the cut, we're going to be going into spoiler territory. So if you just want a knee-jerk what I think, you've got it and you can stop watching. If you want to know why I think it and stuff to recommend it, stuff where I think it could be improved, points where I think it falls down, keep watching. Or if you just like the sound of my voice. So what's The Eye about? It can be summed up really quickly. Our heroine, she's a 22-year-old lady who's been blind since the age of 2. She gets a cornea transplant, and when her eyesight returns she can see ghosts. That's it. It's a really simple premise, and it leads to some really creepy scenarios, at least to start off with. I think it's probably going to be fair to the film if we start off with things that work, because there's a lot that works. And I'll get on to what I feel doesn't work. Other people may disagree. I know some people absolutely love this film. Shit them up. Didn't for me. The film's written, edited and directed by the Pang brothers. So a sibling pair. They obviously work really well together. The editing and the camera work, especially in the first act, is absolutely phenomenal. It works so well to tell the story that we're seeing. It's fairly easy for me to sympathise, given that without these I'm absolutely blind as a bat, so I absolutely do know what it's like to live in an out of focus world, and you know, without glasses, having to hold things up really close to my face, and what that's like. So they employ tons of in-camera tricks and editing tricks to really put you in the position of our heroine, and it's so deftly done. Off the top of my head, because I saw it last night, but right near the start of the movie, where she's had the operation and they're taking the bandages off, so the story is straining to see if she can see. And just the way some of these shots are framed before they start using focus and out of focus for her perspective, things are so specifically framed whilst the bandages are coming off. So her mum and her sister are there, but they're in a two-shot together, and one's blocking the other. When we get shots of the bandages coming off, it's framed strangely, so almost the doctor is almost blocking our vision. So as we're watching this, things that we're used in the language of cinema to see shown clearly are shown obstructed and unclearly, and as a viewer we're straining and looking to see what's happening, what's going on. So we're emotionally we're there almost subconsciously. They're doing this through editing and through framing, subconsciously trying to see, like she's trying to see once the bandages come off. Once the bandages do come off, there's tons of shots where she's in the frame and in focus, and everything around her is out of focus, or sometimes she'll go out, things will go in and out of focus, which I can speak from personal experience. These sections of the film, it is like what it's like to not be able to see very well, and an awful lot of the creepiness and the supernatural stuff is brought in through that, because she can see the very first time the bandages come off, she can see the blurred outlines of her mum, her sister, and the doctor, and a fourth person, and so little is made of it. It's just there in a shot, and then it's gone, and it's not commented on, and there's very little musical cues. It's just there. I mean, how the hell would she know whether there might have been a nurse standing there silent in the room? She wouldn't know. So she doesn't, at first, she doesn't know that the weird things that she's seeing aren't supposed to be there. In the taxi on the way home, after she spent a few more nights in the hospital to recuperate, she's in a taxi with her sister going home, and her sister's babbling on, and she sees a man standing in one of the lanes. He's just in a suit, and he's standing there. It's an empty lane, but he's facing the oncoming traffic, and as they go past, she clocks him and looks and thinks that's a little strange. But how, it seems a little strange, but how would she know? Maybe some people do this all the time, and she'd never have known, because her path as a blind woman would never have crossed them unless someone had pointed it out. She would never have known that they'd be there. There's a lovely moment where she goes to her mum's house, and her mum plays her some old 8mm videotape that her dad took of her as a child, and her mum says that her dad filmed it, who's passed away since, filmed this hoping that if there was a medical breakthrough or her eyesight came back, she could see this video of her as a child. So we get a wonderful scene where she's looking at a screen of herself as a child, so she's seeing herself through the eye of the camera that her dad's holding, whilst we have been taught through the language of the film to be viewing her through the lens of the camera that's filming her. So our positions at that moment in the film are completely overlapping. We're watching her as we watch her watch herself, if you see what I mean. So there's a really compressed visual language there about the act of viewing, the act of seeing, and how we're not passively sitting and watching her. Through the act of viewing, we're experiencing what she's experiencing. Quite a little bit later on in the film, there's a lovely shot of her and her doctor, and they're on a train, and the position of the camera would be within the space of a train as we know it, on the opposite seat. Now, we'll all know that when a train goes through a tunnel, the windows go dark and then become reflective, so they become like mirrors. And there's a sublime little touch during this scene where the camera, beg your pardon, the train goes through a tunnel, so what was daylight pouring through the windows behind them suddenly goes black and becomes reflective, and you can see reflected in the window behind them the face of a ghostly woman. The thing I adore about this creepy little effect is that the way the reflection is placed in the mirror is where the camera is. So it's where spatially on the train, we are sitting. So all of us, so one of the reasons that effect is so uncanny and unnerving is because we're seeing the reflection from the point of view we're sitting at. So it's our reflection. It's the reflection of what the camera sees. So at that moment we realise, so we're sitting silently observing this conversation, but with a ghost sitting on the seat opposite, watching them. And when the train goes through the tunnel, we see our reflection, and they don't notice. It's wonderful little touches like that that ultimately will make me recommend the movie, even though I don't think the movie is ultimately successful in what it tries to do. Other positives are the kinds of ghosts we get here. I'm no expert on the Oriental ghost tradition, but I know enough to know that they've got a very rich culture of ghosts and various types of ghosts. That's one of the major reasons I think that the Asian, for want of a better word, originals of this, Ju-on, Ring, work so much better than the westernized remakes, because there are cultural touchstones that even if you're not part of the culture, when you watch the films that have been made from those originating countries, there are cultural touchstones that you can see, and the ghostly elements are played out probably with more respect, to be perfectly honest, than they sometimes are in the westernized versions, where we just use ghosts as booga booga, aren't they scary, leading up to your Insidious and your Conjuring and stuff like that. We don't have a cultural tradition of ghosts. So in this film, when you see the cold ghost, she's an old lady who continually complains that she's freezing, or the hungry ghost, the little boy who's constantly hungry, and there's another hungry ghost. Google hungry ghosts and you will find pages and pages of Chinese and Japanese ghost stories about hungry ghosts. It's a big thing, and even if we don't understand the cultural touchstones, watching this film as a Westerner, you get that these archetypes of ghosts are loaded with cultural significance. So even if they pop in and pop out, they mean something more than just a scare. So that's an awful lot of the strong stuff, and it does start off really creepy. So after the cut, we're going to talk about some of the things that didn't work quite so well. Cheers. So you're still here, so I guess you want the dirt on the eye, what doesn't work quite so well. This is a film that wears its influences very much on its sleeve, like a Cub Scout's merit badges, which isn't in and of itself a bad thing. For all my talk in the previous segment of the Eastern tradition of ghosts and the like, the cinematic influences on this film are very, very strongly Western films. The Eyes of Laura Mars, The Sixth Sense is a big one. Bizarrely, at the very end, and you're going to have to take my word on this if you haven't seen the film, Final Destination. And this is where the film kind of falls apart for me, because it's not exactly sure what it wants to be. Now, our heroine, our protagonist, realises that she's seeing ghosts, and it freaks her out and it flips her out, and she tells her doctor that she can't go on seeing these hellish things. And they apart from being there and being spooky, they haven't really done much. And it's not that much later that she decides, well, I'm just going to have to live with this. And I don't really understand how she comes to that realization either, because unlike the little boy in The Sixth Sense, who by the end of the film has decided what he's going to do with this ability to communicate with ghosts, she's just carried on for a little bit, and she decides that she's just going to live with it. When she comes to that realization, she realizes, in a really nice moment in the film, I'll grant you that the reflection she's been seeing in the mirror all this time isn't her, and it's actually the reflection of the girl whose corneas she got. And then the movie becomes a let's see if we can track down who donated the corneas so we can find out about her, and then it becomes about laying her spirit to rest. And then at the very end, in a weirdy kind of twist, she's found out that the girl whose eyes she's got used to be able to predict people's deaths, and she became an outcast, and people thought she was a witch and evil, and she kills herself. She kills herself because she saw a big disaster where everyone in her town was going to die. No one believed her. They all died. She hung herself, and they think they've ended it by laying her spirit to rest, and then our hero sees a big disaster coming, very similar to a Final Destination, the start of a Final Destination film, where there's the big multiple victim accident. She sort of foretells that, isn't able to stop it, and although she survives, some flying glass gets in her eyes and she can't see anymore. So what she supposedly has learnt by the end of the film is that she's not going to bemoan now her lack of eyesight, because she has seen the beauty in the world, and she's also seen things that most of us will never see. So she counts her lucky stars, and she carries on, and she's got a boyfriend by the end of it. Big whoop-de-doo. The ghosts are never that menacing. They start off really creepy, but there's no escalation. There's no reason for her, really, apart from just not really wanting to share a lift with a creepy floating dude whose side of his face is caved in. There's no real reason for her to suddenly worry her doctor into thinking that she might be going crazy or suicidal. The interesting thing they could have played with is, because she's assigned to a psychologist who says to her after her operation, your eyesight is just the physical thing that we fixed, and what I'm here to try and help you get used to is the psychological ramifications of having your sight back after 20 years since the age of 2. And in a really neat, condensed way of explaining that, he holds a stapler up and says, "What's this?" And she can't name it, and she reaches out and touches it and says it's a stapler, and he says, "You might be able to see this, but it's not until you touch it that you can put it into some kind of context, and I'm here to help you with your visual language, because you haven't built up a visual language of things. You've only ever just, as a 2-year-old, she's not going to know what a stapler is, so as an adult she's only ever touched a stapler, she's never really seen a stapler." Here's what I would have done to fix. I'd have stripped back the ghost of the woman whose eyes she's got, because it reads like, you know, the really hammy hands of a killer. You know, the concert violinist loses his hands in an accident, gets a hand replacement, but they're the hands of a strangler, and he goes around strangling people. It's that. Strip all of that out. Let's just keep it really simple, and we've got it there in that scene. Her visual vocabulary. She has got eyesight, and she doesn't have the context within which to explain everything she's seeing. Therefore, why not that she's just seeing everything. She's seeing the things that we learn as children to filter out, the things that aren't there, the invisible friends. She doesn't filter them out. She hasn't learned how to filter them out, so she just sees everything. There's a scene in the film where she's at a cafe and she sees some ghosts, and the waitress says, "Oh, you can see them too. They don't normally like to be seen, so other people can see them as well." But let's just take those two things. She's got a different visual vocabulary from us, and the ghosts don't like to be seen. Let's just take that and run with it. Let's just escalate it. The ghosts notice that they're being noticed and they don't like it, so the threat from the ghosts begins to escalate. They get more aggressive. Rather than just being there, they don't like being seen, so they come after her. You can then put her through, I would argue, a much more convincing second act journey where she's going crazy because of things that no one will believe, and her doctor thinks she's going crazy because psychologically she can't handle living in a visual world. So you've got a nice duality running there. And bring us to the crescendo of the film, why not, where rather than a final destination disaster or putting to rest the spirit of the girl whose eyes she's got, why not just bring her to a point where she's so threatened and scared and powerless in the face of this supernatural onslaught that she plucks her own eyes out. She stabs her own eyes out and descends herself back into a world of darkness, and then the ghosts just disperse and leave her alone because they can't see anymore. God damn it, I'm going to remake this film. That would have kept it a lot simpler, a lot more stripped back. It would have stopped it bouncing around between it being the Sixth Sense to The Eyes of Laura Mars to the vengeful spirit stuff from Ju-on and Ring, and which doesn't really play out because the spirit of the girl whose eyes she's got isn't particularly vengeful, and it would have also allowed the spirits to be angry and a threat and dangerous and come at her, and it would have played into the act of seeing. The act of seeing is a dangerous act because she sees the ghosts and the ghosts see that she sees her. It would have played out thematically there as well. Maybe I'm quibbling, but it just lost its focus, no pun intended. Honestly, no pun intended. The story lost its focus and it started wavering, and I think if they could have kept the laser precision of the first 30-40 minutes, we would have had a masterpiece. As it is worth watching. The filmmaking on show, for the most part, for reasons I've already gone into and rambled about, is excellent. The language of cinema that is employed here, the editing, the visual tricks, is all in service of the story, and it's very powerful because of it. It's the story that falls away beneath the technique that ultimately lets the film down. Those are my 2 cents, Internet. Thank you for sticking with me.